Hi, my name is Sean Shapiro, and this is another episode of TPS Traffic Jam, where we jam about traffic. And I have some guests joining me remotely. Some you've seen, or one you've seen, and one you haven't. So I'll let everyone introduce themselves. How you doing?
Good. Thanks for having us back, Sean. I'm Robyn Robertson. I'm the president and CEO of the Traffic Injury Research Foundation and a criminologist. And I'm always interested to talk to you, Sean, about road safety issues.
We've had some fantastic conversations already, and you've joined us for the first two episodes, the inaugural episodes of TPS Traffic Jam. And glad to have you back. Thank you. And Kylee, as I just said your name before, I'll let you introduce yourself too.
Yes, thank you for having me. I am. My name is Kylee Bowman. I'm the youth advisor at the Traffic Injury Research Foundation, and an artist.
Yes, you are. And if for anyone who has caught the first two episodes, Kylie's responsible for the graphics that we use to represent both Karen and Robyn on the cover art for the show. And one day I made to be a cartoon. But you're not just someone who draws cartoons. You have created some truly spectacular artwork. I've seen your site, and we can link to it if you want to promote it, because it's beautiful stuff and really powerful. One in particular, which I think was all related to traffic collision and injury. It's a big story that goes with it. I'll let you tell it. And we're talking today primarily about impaired driving. Something that's important to all of us, but it's really important upcoming this weekend, which is a long weekend here, and we want everyone to be thinking about impaired driving and the risks. So, what are we going to lead with? Where do you want to start?
So for us, I think it's good to start with impaired driving generally and how high the risk is. And still today, 1 in 4 road crashes involves impaired driving. So it's a significant chunk of the problem. And I think one of the conversations we wanted to have today was really around younger people and drinking and driving, and some of the stats, but then also some of the experiences and how do you speak up about it? So I'm really happy that Kylee can join us today. She has a very different perspective than I do, being a much younger person and a newer driver. So I'm looking forward to the conversation, Sean.
Absolutely. I'm glad you brought it up, because it is about perspective. And as we talk about impaired driving and the risks, many younger people say, well, what do you know? You're old, and you can't possibly know what I'm going through. But I've been having this conversation since I was a kid, since I was in high school, and I was hearing it from MAD and OSED and all of the educational groups talking about the issues. And oddly enough, it's many, many years later, and we're still talking about the exact same thing. So, what do you find, Kylee, is either really going on in terms of the education cutting through and speaking to people in your age group, or not happening? What is missing?
Oh, well, I found when I was younger, the don't drink and drive message was really hammered home with all those groups that would come into your school and present. But after a while, it kind of becomes background noise in a way. Like, you always hear it all the time, and you're like, yeah, okay, so we've heard this many times, we'll just carry on. And it's a bit different when you're so young. You don't see yourself driving, so you think of it as this is long in the future, not my problem yet, I don't have to worry about it. But also, you are a passenger when you're that young, so you still do have to worry about it and learn that you do need to speak up if the adult driving is intoxicated while they're driving.
It's a really good point. And I've never really taken it in that exact way. In that, if I'm not a driver, I may not relate to the messaging as much because I don't have the experience myself as a driver, and also that it's hard to have a voice to speak as a young person to an adult or even a peer when there's so much pressure about not being excluded and not being accepted, and I'm driving down into deeper things. But I get it. There's a lot of pressure there. It's not easy.
No.
And sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, I was just gonna say, well, it gets a bit different when, at least in BC, 16, you can get your L license, and then you start learning, and there's so much you have to be aware of. Nothing is second nature yet. Everything you have to think about when I'm making this right-hand turn, think about the shoulder check, think about the slowing down, think about the glancing behind you in the rearview mirror, and then you turn. It's not natural yet. So the idea of adding in alcohol is just I can't do that.
I've got to tell you that I don't think there's anything natural about driving for anyone, and I say that because I see a lot of adults who have experience behind the wheel, and what you'd think is second nature doesn't even enter the equation. There's people who are making turns that are missing major steps, and they're putting people at risk, and they're causing collisions all over the place. And alcohol would just turn that into a soup sandwich. But the truth is that we have people of varying levels of skill operating very large, and I say very large because anything bigger than a bicycle to me is considered very large. It's going to hurt someone if it hits them. That doesn't say that cyclists don't hurt people when they hit them. There's lots of injuries there too. But there's people who believe they're very good, and really they're not. And then there are people who are so good that they think they can defy all logic and drink at the same time, well, or prior to.
Yeah, and I think Kylie's point is an interesting one because I hadn't really thought about it when you're learning to drive, because as adults, we know, like, no alcohol, there are graduated driver licensing restrictions and so forth in place. But this past weekend, we presented at the Canadian Association of Road Safety Professionals conference talking about young drivers in particular. And so I looked at some of the data around impaired driving, and it's very interesting because 16 to 19-year-olds are less likely than all age groups to drink and drive, although still almost 28% of 16 to 19-year-olds killed in fatal crashes test positive for alcohol. But then when you look at the 20 to 24 age range, it actually goes up to almost 43%.
Wow.
Whereas, when we're talking kind of the national average, it's like one in three. It's about 30%. It's a little less than 1 in 3. But thinking about how different it is for 16 to 19-year-olds versus 20 to 24-year-olds, and when Kylie made that point about how when you're a younger driver and you don't have a lot of driving experience and your crash risk is high, you wouldn't even think about including alcohol in the mix. And then we also know that there's a lot of messaging for high schools around drinking and driving and prevention. But then it seems like from 20 to 24-year-olds, that all changed, and that really prompted a conversation about why is that?
It's funny as you say that a lot of people wouldn't mix things, but there's so many pressures that, again, we just said it, but I not wanting to disappoint someone by not being the driver, not wanting to miss out that FOMO business. It's real and it's powerful, and there's got to be ways of combating all the stereotypes and all the concerns. Just to segue for a second, how many? I get updates all the time from my friend Scott Matthews down at our CIB about how many people were arrested in the city of Toronto over the weekend, and I have been pretty good, although I've fallen a bit behind in terms of making updates, telling everybody on TikTok and social media platforms how many. So unless you've looked at my Twitter feed, you may not know. Any guesses as to how many people we arrested in the city of Toronto over the weekend?
I'm going to say it might not be a small number.
Well, I don't want to lead you any a high or low because it's not a huge number. It's not in the hundreds, but it's significant to me because anything over one, actually one is too many. So, they seem to hover in Toronto in the 1 to 30 range. But if you want to take a guess, by all means, I can just tell you too. I don't want to punish you by making you guess. There's no prize or punishment if you get it wrong.
Yeah. So yeah, I'd say it might be a little bit higher.
Well, actually, last weekend I would have thought very high. It was actually 21 for a weekend in Toronto with a party and a parade. I don't think it's that bad. I think considering the fact that I met with some friends in the States with police services who told me some staggering numbers per day, we are lower over a weekend than they are during a day. However, still 21 people who have made a conscious decision. I say conscious because you're a responsible person. You're making that choice to get behind the wheel. It didn't happen by accident. You didn't get drunk and fall into your car and start it and drive away. In any case, 7 drivers were at least twice the legal limit. 1 driver hit several parked cars and flipped his car. And 1 driver was passed out in the drive-through because they needed their num-num.
Yeah, often when you see impaired drivers, the amount of alcohol they've had they've had to drink before they got behind the wheel is somewhat alarming, because the average, I think, in fatal crashes is like a blood alcohol concentration of about 0.17. You think about the legal limit being 0.08, that's quite high. So yeah, and I know even when we think about the numbers that they're small, that's very good news, because the majority of Canadians don't drink and drive. But when they do, that proportion that does often does so often, and they're very, very high risk on the road. Your crash risk increases exponentially with the alcohol that you're consuming as that rises. So I think people tend to underestimate the risks and maybe underestimate how much they've had or how impaired they are.
Kylee, do you think with younger folks, do you think that there is a belief that they have a certain amount that they can get away with, or that's safe, or as long as I'm under, one beer or one drink, I'm okay? Do you think there's a scoreboard that says there's an over/under factor?
Oh yeah, that happens frequently. It also happens along with, I've had like something with bread. I've had a sandwich before I drank, so then my tolerance will now be like 3 drinks, and then I'm okay. You kind of come up with this arbitrary recipe of staying sober.
Right. So probably not an acknowledgement from many people that being under the influence or being impaired could happen at any amount, and it doesn't have to be the legal limit before you're impaired. And people really get shocked when we tell them that they could be arrested for impaired operation even if they blow under, because it's all based on the behavior that's observed. So I think a lot of, it doesn't matter young or old, people are confused as to what impairment is and how easy it is for one to become impaired.
Yeah. And I mean, there's a lot of different factors that can influence your level of impairment in terms of how much alcohol is absorbed into your bloodstream, right? So there's how much you eat and what kind of food you eat. There's how much sleep you've had, and then there's of course biological sex. There are differences between men and women, but I think one of the most concerning things when people do drink and drive is they're often gauging their ability to drive based on how they feel. And we know from research how they feel is not a good indication of how impaired they actually are.
Yes.
So kind of that I feel okay. If you have to stop and think about it, you probably aren't.
There's a movie that I loved growing up, and what is the name right now? Weird Science. Mm-hmm. And I whenever I talk about impaired driving, is I visualize one of the two. Do you know have you seen this movie? Weird Science is Kelly LeBlanc, I think is the name of the model who plays in it, and basically two computer geeks at home can't get a date, so they make one on the computer, and this model appears, and she's their dream girl. And at some point they get out and there's drinking, and one of them sits in the back seat and he says, "Give me the keys, I can drive." It was just a scene where I'm replaying it. I think it's funny. I'm not doing it justice. Go see The Weird Science. It was one of my favorite movies as a kid. In any case, people when under the influence are under the influence and are no longer a good judge of themselves or others. And I think that's what I was trying to get through with that very long and involved story.
And I mean, one of the other things that Kylee and I have really talked about a lot, which I found interesting, was the whole concept of the designated driver, right? For those of us that grew up with that concept, we all know what a DD is, but for younger people, the term DD, Kylee, your reaction to that the first time you heard it.
I can bet.
Yeah, I didn't know what DD meant. We tend not to say that. It's more so who's going to be the sober one. The sober driver.
When I was going to nightclubs and partying, I remember bars had a designated driver protocol. They got free pop. They got things, finger foods, things to keep them going, because they were being the responsible one, allowing everybody else to get completely raged out and way over the limit. But it was a way of even positively promoting and awarding a benefit to someone who's really not spending money in a bar. So it was a very forward thinking, and it was one particular bar that doesn't exist anymore that was doing that stands out. But it's a great concept. How do you make the hero a hero well in advance? They're choosing not to party, but they're doing the right thing.
And that's one of the challenges as well, because oftentimes the intention going out is, this person will be the designated driver, but once you're out and your friends are having fun, then it's like, oh, just have one, you'll be
Come
okay.
on.
And at the end of the night, at times it can be that the person who was the designated driver is now the person who drank the least, so should be best
fine.
able to, the safest
Yeah,
to drive.
Better than the other ones, yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, I know we've seen that with some of the research we've done around women in particular, that that as women going out in groups and someone's a designated driver, there's often peer pressure for that person to still join in. But then at the end of the night, everyone still wants a ride home. So they feel pressure to drive, even if they may not feel safe to drive. So I think that's one of the ideas that we really need to think about, and particularly around long weekends, right? And holiday weekends, we often think about drinking and driving at Christmas time, and there's ride check programs, but most fatalities involving impaired driving actually happen in May, June, and September. Or August, summer months. But basically the spring, summer months is when we should be most concerned about it. And with July 1st coming up, definitely an important issue to think about as you're planning your plans to go out and celebrate.
And many people in Toronto are probably rolling their eyes going, we have so much transit, we have so much, or so many, I should say, opportunities and options, whether it be through rideshare programs or taxi or, like I said, the transit system. How could anybody have this problem? Well, not every community has the same access to transit and variety as we have. We're very privileged in Toronto to have this infrastructure. Other communities may not. Kylee, where you live, do you have fantastic transit?
Oh God, no. No, it's bad.
For anyone who wonders, you're not in Ontario, so
no.
Yeah, and again, every area has its own unique challenges. I know that here we even have companies that will you can drive there to wherever you're going and call them, and they'll send a driver and a car that will take you. So so two people show up, one gets out, gets into your car, drives it home for you, and then you actually get the ride with the responsible person driving a different car. And it's a unique idea. It's been around for a while now, but it is a unique idea. The only issue I have with it is when someone gets home with their keys, they can now make the decision to drive.
Yeah.
That's the only problem that I have with it. But in theory, it's fantastic because it allows you to not worry about the tomorrow problem. And the tomorrow problem is I can't take a taxi home because I need my car for work tomorrow. And we're not even getting into the fact that people tomorrow could still be drunk. I have arrested people the night after a rager where they're still drunk from the night before, but in their mind they slept and they're good to go. Yeah. And they're not. Yeah.
And I mean, you see that often with ignition interlock programs. So impaired drivers who are arrested have to get an ignition interlock device installed on their car, which is a breath testing device attached to the starter of your vehicle, and you have to blow into it, not just every time you start your car, but also there are random running retests that you need to pull over and do in the course of driving. But the most common time for people to fail on an ignition interlock device is actually in the morning.
Wow.
Right? And that's a reflection of how much alcohol they've consumed overnight. So there's that hungover effect, right, where the alcohol is actually still in your system, and it's probably not safe to drive. And I imagine you, Sean, could comment on that. Seeing people arrested early in the morning.
Yeah,
for that.
It happens all the time, and I'll tell you, it's not who you might think. Yeah. It's not someone. It's someone who's going to work, who's a responsible person who just happened to have a capacity to drink more. Very often, they're very put together. You would never think that alcoholics. It's not that they're not slurring their words. They're functioning, but they're drunk. And it's just that it's such a commonplace for them. They built up such a tolerance that they appear to the average person. I always talk about these videos that I watched when I was becoming a police officer, and at the Toronto Police College. And they're great videos, and that's why they've continued to show them for years and years. But they had a gentleman who was arrested, who's being paraded. So when you get arrested, they bring you to the station, and you're paraded before the officer in charge. The officer explains why you've been arrested and what you're there for. So this was to comply with the breath demand. And this guy, I believe, had to be held up. He was a fall down drunk, and he blew just over the limit. Yeah. Now, the second frame that they show you is a petite woman who comes through the same thing. She's looks dead on, straight as an arrow, no issues, doesn't slur her words, doesn't have any problems, and she blows 4 times the limit. So every single person is going to have a different response to alcohol and drugs for that matter. So to say that one drink an hour, which is very often what people think is okay, may not be okay for you, may be okay for somebody else, but everyone deals with alcohol and drugs differently.
Yeah. And actually for women, it's actually less. So the one drink an hour is actually for men. And that's a standard drink, not a supersized drink, not the mega pint of wine.
I'm looking for my big mug.
That we've heard reference to. So it's less for women. And I think that's one of the other things Kylee and I've talked about is when you go out and you have male friends with you and some of them may encourage you to drink up, or you may feel implicit pressure to keep up. And the reality is women metabolize alcohol differently and get more impaired more quickly than the males.
I don't drink on a regular basis. And if I do, I have one, maybe two, and I could buy a 6-pack and last for about 6 months. So I just don't drink. It's just not something. I'm an active dad. I don't have time for that.
Yeah.
So because of that, I have zero tolerance. If I have a glass of wine, I turn red. Like I feel it. And I would never drive after consuming alcohol. It's just not worth it. Never mind because I'm an advocate that speaks against impaired driving. Never mind that I'm a police officer and being caught for something like that would be horrible. I just don't do it because it's the best way to go for me, and I think for everybody. But obviously, not everybody agrees. Kylee, how would you best put into words, to people in your age group, why you advocate for driving sober? Pressure, all these pressure questions.
I guess it's just never worth it. The risk is never worth that easy ride home. There's so many other options. Yes, taxis are expensive, but it's worth making it home alive. And also, it's not just about you when you go out and drive drunk or impaired. You could hurt somebody else. You could hurt a whole family. It no longer makes it just about you.
Yeah,
it's not worth it.
Yeah, and I think to Kylie's point, we sometimes in the moment you tend to underestimate it. And I know when we do surveys of impaired drivers, some of the things they'll tell you is, I wasn't going that far. The roads weren't that busy. I felt okay to drive, and I needed my car the next day. So those are kind of the thought processes. So unfortunately, the idea that you could hit someone, much less hit and kill someone, doesn't always enter into the equation because it seems almost impossible. And yet, I mean, Sean, in your line of work, right, that you see those things and it's the unexpected. You can never anticipate what might happen, even if it's a short drive or you're not going very far, the road's not busy, something can still happen. So how do
sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, how do we change that narrative so that the thoughts are more focused around, I could hurt someone, I could injure someone, I could lose a lot. The consequences for impaired driving are significant, and rightly so, instead of the short term, I need my car to get somewhere tomorrow.
I had a conversation with someone on a previous episode that's yet to air. It was John Westhaver, and he and I were chatting about how to focus on safe driving. How do you promote it? And it came to me that if you visualize that everybody in every car around you, this is unrealistic, but we'll go with it anyway, that everybody in every car around you was filled with people you loved, would it change the way that you drove? Like everybody.
Yeah.
Because when you speak in public, they always say, picture everybody else naked, and then you'll feel self-confident speaking to them. If you visualize them naked, you won't be embarrassed. You won't have difficult. Well, when you're driving, visualize everybody else as someone that means something incredibly special to you. How would you treat them if it was your mom in every car? If it was, because it's somebody's mom, it's somebody's brother, sister, and could that possibly help sway? How do you give people these motivations to change behavior when it's so simple to make a mistake and so simple and easy to kill somebody?
Yeah. Well, I think, speaking up is probably the best one when you know that you're planning to go out to celebrate or visit people, and alcohol will be involved, thinking about it in advance, but also, practicing some of that speaking up, right, about why we choose to make safe choices on the road in the moment, because that's the challenge with any type of education, right, is getting it to the people in the moment when they're making the decision to help them think differently. So I think one of the things that all of us can do is speak up when you see those things happening, even if it's hard, and it's daunting. It's important to do it.
The consequences for impaired operation, I think that many don't understand that it's not just a 90-day suspension. It's a criminal offense, and that's before anyone gets hurt. There's more that can come from it, and there's obviously a range. And very often when we see someone who's arrested once, they tend to be arrested more than once because it tends to be linked to a problem. And acknowledging that there are people with addictions and have difficulties. And whenever I speak about impaired driving, I get a lot of comments that say, well, you shouldn't criticize someone for making that decision. You don't think that anyone woke up in the morning and said they wanted to kill somebody. And yet people are often charged 4 times, 5 times, are being pulled over and charged for impaired operation while suspended on the first impaired operation. It's not just someone made a mistake. These are, again, active decisions and repetition of behavior. And how to fix it is a complex question, or at least the answer is.
Yeah. And I mean, I think with some of the penalties, there's a good package, for lack of a better word, although I'm sure people convicted of impaired driving wouldn't call it a good package. But it's like there's the ignition interlock on your car, which physically prevents you from starting the car after you've been drinking. There's in Ontario at least, there's the Back on Track program. So there's alcohol education and treatment. And then, of course, the financial penalty, the fines that you pay is an important one. And the most significant one is the license suspension, right? Mm-hmm. You can actually lose your license for a very long time.
For life, at a certain point.
Right. But even if you're criminally convicted, right, you have like a 1-year driving prohibition. And most of us couldn't go 24 hours without driving our car, much less a year.
I would be completely out of luck if I didn't have a driver's license. I rely on it. My family relies on it. I'm the only driver in the household. So losing that is not only employment and financial, but just the freedom to do things that you want to do to live normally for me. I could not function on transit; just wouldn't work for me. I tried it; didn't work for me. But the deal is that there are people who advocate for completely making every vehicle an interlock vehicle. For making it where maybe when someone breaks the law in this fashion is found guilty, crush their cars. They're talking about really dramatic and drastic responses because there's a belief, and I can't disagree. There's a belief that it's just not getting through to people. And when we have repeat offenders, that's a big deal.
Yeah. And it's most Canadians choose not to drink and drive, but there is a proportion who do. And even when we look at our road safety monitor polls sponsored by Desjardins Beer Canada, the people who self-report doing it often or very often is concerning. More jurisdictions are doing vehicle impoundment now, so to literally stop you from doing it. And then for technology in all vehicles, there's a major initiative in the US by a whole group of safety agencies and advocates called the Driver Alcohol Detection Safety System, or DADS, which is actually piloting technology in vehicles that could be used in all vehicles. So it would become standard on your vehicle, like a seatbelt or an airbag. And that's something that has been talked about, to your point, Sean, about making those cars that you literally can't drive.
And we know that even with interlock systems, people work very hard to beat those systems. So there are people who, whether they pick up someone and say, I'll give you a drive, just blow on the, no, there's all sorts of, we can't stop criminal activity. And people get, really employ ingenuity at its best when they have to try and break a law, which is really sad because these laws are and the efforts put out are simply there to protect people and communities. That people can put so much work and time into breaking or circumventing a law instead of just not doing the thing that they're trying to prevent you from doing. It boggles the mind. But something I want to take back to Kylee for a second. Wearing a seatbelt. Do you wear one?
Yes.
Do you think that do you find that today's day and age that people don't wear one or do? Amongst your friends, do you? If I hear from my father and I hear bing 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 in the phone, he calls me. I'm like, Dad, put your seatbelt on. What's going on?
Yep.
It's almost like smoking. I very rarely see someone smoking. It's something that is less common where I live. Seatbelts are not common. For someone not wearing a seatbelt, it's very uncommon for me. As a police officer, I can't tell you the last time I've written a ticket, and I haven't been on the road for 4 years. So before, when I was on the road, I couldn't tell you the last time I wrote a ticket. It's that long ago for seatbelts. And yet somehow, impaired driving happens all the time. I just don't get it.
Yeah, so one of the things that you find in fatal crashes is that those drivers are less likely to wear their seatbelt, and I mean, yourself how life-saving that is. Till now, one of the most important safety features we have in our vehicles are, in fact, seatbelts, because they protect you against being ejected from the vehicle and striking a hard object, which will most definitely kill you. And when we look at fatal crashes, the seatbelt usage rates, again, are lower. And we actually see what I found also interesting in looking at the data around young drivers is that about 65% of those 16 to 19 and 20 to 24 in fatal crashes weren't wearing their seatbelt. And I was very surprised by that.
Well, people tend to ditch the seatbelt when it's just going to be a short drive.
Yeah.
Really?
You just kind of throw yourself in the car and you're like, yeah, no, it's too much work right now. Let's stick in the car and we'll go, and it's only going to be 2 minutes.
I feel naked if I don't put it on.
Yeah.
And I hate the sound that my car makes. Like, if the combination of those two, it's torture. I can't do it.
Yeah, and to Kylie's point, that's actually one of the common misperceptions is I don't need my seatbelt because I'm not going very far and I'm not driving very fast. And yet the reality is that's when you're most likely to be in a collision, right? Is close to your home, short trips. And Quebec did a fantastic campaign around seatbelt usage, which kind of portrayed person running to the corner store for a bag of milk, loaf of bread, because that's really illustrated the average short kind of trip that someone would do without their seatbelt. To encourage people, even at low speeds, crashes are very dangerous.
Oh, no question. I am such a creature of habit that if I move the car 5 feet, I put it on, even not thinking about it, because I do it all the same time. In Ontario, and I don't know if it's the same everywhere in Canada, but there's actually not a requirement to signal unless using your indicators, unless there's going to be a movement that could affect somebody else. So if there was nobody else on the road, technically you don't need to use your signal. However, I signal even if I'm alone because you never know. And you only find out after something went wrong. And I just developed good habits. So my habits are, the way I do one thing is how I do everything. I do it always the same time. It's just a good thing. Just like driving and consuming alcohol. I don't mix them because you just do it once and suddenly you start thinking you're okay. Do you think that we're doing a good enough job in general, I mean, I ask both of you, in educating the public, aside from just hitting people up in school going, don't do that, not just sending out a Twitter post or going on TikTok and talking about is there something that we're missing that you think should be done differently to educate people, to really convey what's going on when it comes to impaired driving?
Well, that's a good question, Sean. And actually, that's something that we're going to talk about with our Impaired Driving Coalition of Canada that we've organized, which involves, I think, about 25 organizations, including Toronto Police Service, to look at what are the important topics around impaired driving right now. And I know, generally speaking, because there's been so much focus on cannabis and cannabis impaired driving and other drugs and driving, alcohol has taken a bit of a back seat, and yet alcohol is still a significant problem. So I think education really needs to focus around overcoming that complacency that this is an issue. We've talked about it. We've addressed it. We're done. And we're not. And I know for young people, it's always new. That was one of the things I learned talking to Matt Evans with the Ontario Students Against Impaired Driving, is that for young people, it's a new issue, and we have to continue to one, focus on that age group, but also weave it into our day-to-day conversations about what are the risks associated with it, and really empowering people to speak up, to push those social norms even further, to reduce the likelihood that people will drink and drive.
I think you really touched on something very important, is that there's a focus on the whole drug side of thing. And listen, cannabis has been utilized by many people prior to it becoming legal, and now maybe that it's legal, I don't know, is it more or less, you think? I can say I don't know. But I can tell you that in terms of arrests in Toronto, it's more uncommon for us to see arrests by drug take place. Now, that's not to say we don't charge a driver who has a 0 BAC or has a requirement as a learning, who has drugs in their system and loses their license on a suspension. But for criminal impaired, I see it less frequently, which is interesting because it goes to that whole concept of what is popular. And yet, still a large number, 21 on the weekend. And I was away on vacation. I came back, and it was a fairly large number that had amassed in terms of arrests while I'd been gone. So, yeah, definitely. I look forward to what the coalition comes up with, because I'm all for it. Better education and really targeting and communicating effectively with people to convey the importance, because obviously we're missing something somewhere, and we've been missing it for 60 years. There's something wrong with conveying this message. Or it's tougher.
We've detected drugs in fatally injured drivers for really a long time. And actually, when you look at the percentages, more fatally injured drivers test positive for drugs. Now, that's not to say they're impaired. It's just that they have drugs in their system. And it's very difficult to say with, what level is impairing for an individual user. But we do find that cannabis is one of the most common drugs. And then you also often see cannabis combined with alcohol. That's probably one of the most common combinations. And I think what a lot of people may not know is that when you combine just a little bit of alcohol with cannabis, the impairing effects are additive, which greatly increases your crash risk. So the combination of the two substances actually is quite risky, and we don't see as much education around that combination. And yet, when you arrest impaired drivers, polysubstance use is common.
Absolutely. To what degree, I don't know, because very often you'll find people who come in for alcohol and they'll be tested for alcohol and it stays alcohol, but they may have other things in their system that never get looked at. Kylee, what do you think is the primary motivator? I mean, maybe we touched on this a bit before, but I kind of want to come back to it. The primary motive, is it money? Is it the uncomfortable thing? Because it's expensive to get alternate routes home. It seems so simple that we have options, regardless of where you are. There's options. Is it what do you think a young person's motivation is to go down this path? Is it just not even on the radar? Is it too easy to get away with? What do you think?
From some of the people I've recently interacted with, it seems almost like an adrenaline rush, an experience. It's the will I be caught, and then they do it. It's a cool story they can whip out at a party. That I was hammered and then I still drove home and made it
Russian roulette.
Yeah,
that's very interesting. That's a perspective I've actually never heard, and that's scary. That's scary that it's now a challenge. It's actually a badge of honor to have succeeded and not killed anybody or made it home in one piece. That's very troubling, but it's interesting, and I'm wow.
That was my reaction when I heard the stories.
It's because I can, not that I can justify it, not that it makes it okay, but I can relate to, I got no cash, but I got keys. Yeah. I get that. It's not okay, but I can at least relate to some degree. There's times when I had money, there's times when I didn't, and I can relate to that. I cannot relate to, this is fun and this is cool. Can't get that.
Well, I think part of it, Sean, is like young people are biologically programmed to take risks, right? That's the whole survival of the species thing. If young people didn't take risks, then, as a species, we might not be here. But it's the type of risk, right? And
You said it really nicely, because I did a lot of stupid stuff when I was a kid, and I was always told it was stupid stuff. But risk is good. I like that.
yeah, and I mean, for young people, they perceive risk differently. And like, for example, young people are less afraid of dying and more concerned about being injured or seriously injured. Whereas I think for adults, we're probably, most concerned about dying. So finding a way to communicate that risk so that young people can make informed choices. And I mean, the reality is often the understanding of the risk associated with impaired driving is not well understood. As a general idea, people know it's risky, but they don't understand how or why your risk increases exponentially. So maybe going back to our topic about education, that's one of the things that we can focus on a little bit more, is helping people understand what exactly that risk is.
For sure. Thinking back to when I was in high school, I mean, I had an interesting education about it. I had a student transfer my school who was involved in a collision that killed all their friends. That school got a direct access to secondhand trauma, to it was a different experience. And my school had a very active OSED chapter. Maybe they haven't, folks these days haven't had enough direct trauma related to it to teach them the lesson. Because you look at it, and they talk about war, and there's a saying that goes around the internet and says, a strong man may make easy times make. So it's that concept where if you don't learn through the horrible experiences of what's going on, then what prepares you? And we can tell you and teach you, and maybe that's what's lacking. People need to have some bad experiences, and it's experiences nobody wants, and no one should have to live through, because trauma's not fun. I'll tell you that for sure.
Yeah,
but I guess it's a different sort of. There's personal trauma, and then there's it happened in the school. It happened to another kid. That still wasn't me.
Well, it's an interesting point. Did you have you had in your school direct links to? Yeah. And
yeah.
Okay.
It definitely hits home, especially people who are close to the people involved. But it's still a lot of kids. It didn't happen to me. I didn't know the kid.
I'm still good. Was it death or injury?
Death.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
Death and injury happen.
They usually go hand in hand.
If
it was one incident. Yes, you can tell I've been a cop too long that I'm making a joke.
The Traffic Injury Research Foundation is a registered charity and a nonprofit independent road safety research institute. So myself and most of my staff are researchers, but probably one of the most important things we do is share the research with all levels of government, not just in Canada, but abroad, with industries, with nonprofits, and we work with communities and other stakeholders to help them use the research, to help them improve programs and improve practices and be more effective and efficient with their work. So making sure the research is used is an important piece of what we do. And having Kylee on board as our youth advisor is a new addition, and we're really pleased about it, because we want to ensure that all the different perspectives are represented and that we're reaching those different audiences. So we have a lot of free information on our website at www.tirf.ca.
That's awesome. I can speak firsthand that I utilize your information on a regular basis. You are a source that helps fuel what I do as a traffic safety educator here at the Toronto Police. So thank you for what you do, and thank you for joining me today. And Kylee, as a youth advisor, is that the correct? That's the title. You bring a really interesting perspective. What do you have that gives you that ability to speak a different language and speak to different age groups?
I guess I can relate to them more. I've freshly been through the whole process. I'm still going through some of the process. I'm still learning. I'm only 20, so I haven't mastered the driving skill and everything to do with it. So I can still give that different perspective that a lot of younger people can relate to.
And you yourself have can speak from some experience, because you've been involved in crashes. So you are really bridging the gap between, I guess, different eras of education, making it accessible for everybody.
Yeah, so I can show them that it can happen to you. You are not some invincible force. It can, and as you drive more, it most likely will. You will probably be involved in something, or someone else close to you will be involved in something. So that's just a reality. And to make your reality as safe as possible is something that, of course, you want to go for. Why wouldn't you want to do that?
Hey, if we can remove crashes from occurring, and that's a dream. That's amazing, because there's so much trauma and heartache that's related to crashes. It's people who, just going about their day, that become involved with something through the actions and choices of others, that could simply end their life, or the impact of ending their life could, it butterfly effect into the entire community. It's amazing. It's scary. And thank you for both of you for what you do. I've really enjoyed this opportunity to chat and get into these topics, but there's always more. We could do this for hours, and unfortunately nobody wants to listen to us for hours, so we have to do it in bite-sized pieces. But thanks for joining me today, and I look forward to doing this again sometime soon.
Okay, great to see you, Sean. Thanks for having us.
It's my pleasure.
Thank you.